Former Viking Gene Washington, ladies and gentlemen, his daughter Maya Washington. Can the Vikings bounce back by looking back? Gene Washington was drafted by the Minnesota Vikings in the first round nearly 50 years ago. Gene knows a thing or two about adversity. After all, he was an African-American man recruited from the South at the height of the segregation era to play football for one of the first fully integrated NCAA teams. At the time, Gene didn't realize how his contributions and those of his teammates would impact the game of football on the college and professional level. That legacy is being immortalized in a documentary directed and produced by his daughter Maya, Through the Banks of the Red Cedar, now in post-production. Through the Banks of the Red Cedar.com. Maya, Gene, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
You know, Maya, I got to tell you something. As a teenage boy, I thought your dad was God.
I don't think I was that good.
You were awfully good, man. You got me through a lot of winter, very cold, harsh winter Sundays. I was one of those guys. I was one of those kids, Mr. Washington.
Well,
if the Vikings lost,
if you were watching me, I was on the field. It was really cold for me, I tell you.
So I'm all warm in the house, and you're out there freezing.
You know, those are the days that we didn't have gloves and we didn't have anything, you know. And it was a struggle, but I tell you, Bud took care of us.
Isn't that wonderful? I have to tell you, your father, I've never met Gene Washington in person, but I've followed your career from the time I was, from the very beginning as far as that's concerned. Your father always handled himself with great class, very, very professional, very, very talented man. Do you think I've said enough nice things about your father, Maya? Is it getting a little sickening?
No, it's great to hear.
It's true.
It really is.
It is true. Philip Wise with us, former Minnesota Viking. He's the one that all the running backs would run over on their way to score touchdowns. Philly.
Hey, it's all good.
You know Gene Washington, Phil?
No, I didn't get to meet him, but I believe you were up here at the Player Care Foundation at the Sharkey Institute in Edina a couple years ago.
Is that where we had those evaluations?
Yeah, I saw you.
Okay.
And I was there. But there was something about the mood of the players. It wasn't as jovial as it usually is. And I don't know if it was the place, but I didn't get to speak to you.
Well, you got to realize this: when you have these medical evaluations, it's not you don't know what to expect.
I've been to a lot of them. We've always had, how the locker room is. They're joking and getting on each other, and as we've gotten older, it was a little different.
Well, also you got to realize a lot of guys you saw were in their 70s, man.
Yeah, that's true.
That makes a big difference, and as I recall, there's a lot of us that came in for those examinations and from all across the country. See,
correct. That's correct. And I was wondering, do you live here or?
Yeah, I live in Plymouth. Here in Plymouth. Right down, not far from downtown, and so we've lived here in the Wayzata School District. All of my kids, my three daughters, Maya, Lisa, and Gina, they all went to Wayzata Senior High School. So we've been here a long time.
Somebody said that, and I didn't believe them. I was shocked.
Oh, hey, this is a great place. I'm originally from the Houston, Texas area.
But I was shocked because this is the first one I've seen you at. And we've had a couple of them here.
Oh, I see.
And I've been down to Green Bay to the Packers, and they're great. But I didn't know you lived here.
Yes.
The Vikings always say they don't know I'm here either, and I've been on radio. How many years, Tom?
Here we go.
How many years I've been on radio, Tom?
Here we go, Maya. Crocodile tears.
But finish interviewing this great man.
I will do that. Walser Automotive Group, Walser.com brings you more of the KQ Morning Show. Walser Automotive Dealers and Walser.com is your path to a very different kind of car buying experience. No haggling, one low prices on all their vehicles, and the price for your perfect ride is listed online without giving up your personal information, and, of course, free warranty for life. It's all part of the Walser way to buy a car. Walser Automotive Group, Walser.com. Doug Sprinthal in a couple minutes. Maya, one thing that I have to tell you is, and I can't believe it happened in my lifetime, looking back now, but I have always known, since I was a little boy, I have always known football to include black players, because the University of Minnesota, I can proudly say, was one of the very first college football teams to have black players on it, as far as, your Big Ten schools or whatever. That had a black quarterback when I was, I think, 8 years old? And to me, that's how it's always been. So later on to hear, and I didn't hear until later on, that some college teams didn't have any black players on them. And I look back now, and the fact that happened in my lifetime shocks me.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. It's really a lot to sort of wrap our heads around, for my generation, for your generation, for anyone who grew up seeing black players at all. We take for granted that the representation is what it is today. But 50 years ago, when my dad enrolled at Michigan State in 1963, like you mentioned, there were some programs in the Big Ten, like University of Minnesota, Michigan, Michigan State, who might have 1 or 2 black players every 10 years or so. But what Duffy Doherty did at Michigan State was he had, at the time my dad was there, 23 black players and 11 starters. So it was the first time a team actually looked closer to what we see demographically on the field today. And his team was so successful that pretty much not only the Big Ten, but all the Southern schools and the SEC were all segregated. So because they won back-to-back national titles, the rest of the country took notice, and slowly, along with some of the civil rights legislations, you started to see other programs finally fully integrate, instead of just having 1 or 2 players being open to actually having a well-stocked team with diversity.
Right. I mean, and having a sense of humor about it, the Vikings had 1 white player, and they just cut him because he was the kicker. Just kidding, Maya. Just kidding. But no, and again, Gene, it's hard to believe that in my lifetime that happened. You would think, well, that had to be 100 years ago.
Well, here again, that was in the 50s and 60s, and again, I played in the 60s then in high school, and all of the schools, the whole way of life in Texas, where we're from, was completely segregated. Black students could not attend classes with white students. And for example, I lived in LaPorte, Texas, and I was bused to Baytown for my high school education. And my wife, Claudia, she lived over in McNair Station, and she was bused to Baytown for her high school too. So my wife, Claudia, and I, we met as ninth graders, and we only met mainly because the cities we lived in was completely segregated, and so there were high schools right down the street from where we lived and everything, but they bused us to Baytown, and that was the only way that we could to get our high school education. So we'll be celebrating our 50th wedding anniversary next year. So we've been together since the 9th grade.
God, amazing.
And it's going to Michigan State, coming from a completely segregated situation where you have no relationship whatsoever with white people, if you will. It was very interesting how when I went to Michigan State, George Webster was from Anderson, South Carolina. He experienced the same thing. He came from segregation. Bubba Smith played at Beaumont, Charles and Paul at High School in Beaumont, Texas. We played against each other. Jimmy Ray was from Fayetteville, North Carolina, and he was our quarterback. And so here we are. We have a black quarterback in 1966, national champions. And also, almost half of the team, all of our starters, just half of our starters, were all from the South. And our team captains, which is the first time in history for Michigan State, Clinton Jones was our halfback, and George Webster was, of course, our rover back. So we have Jimmy Ray as our starting quarterback, and we have 2 co-team captains. And that was very historic. And we never played any teams down in the South because if we traveled down Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, all of the schools were segregated, so we never played Southern teams.
Right.
And so you can imagine if you had to travel down south, the question would be where would you house all of these black players on our team?
Sure.
and all of the hotels were segregated. And I do have a friend. I know you heard of Oscar Reed, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I know Oscar well.
Yeah,
Give the
Oscar
seed to Oscar Reed.
Yeah, Oscar played at Colorado State. And, of course, Colorado State, for example, they played the University of Oklahoma. So when Oscar traveled with his team, Colorado State, to Norman, Oklahoma, the team, the administrative people who represent who's on the team and all, they had to call ahead and find some black families so that he could have a place to stay while he was in Norman, Oklahoma.
Sure.
And so he would go stay with the family, and when the game come up, they would send a taxi over for him, and he'd just join the team at the stadium.
Unbelievable.
Now that actually happened. So it was very. Now here again, Oscar was kind of after me, but it still was in the '60s. But yeah, a lot of people don't remember that. It was really a tough life, especially for the black players and for all of the black community, where we had to live like that. We couldn't participate in any elections. We couldn't vote. City, county, or national elections, and so it wasn't really a nice scene for us.
I can understand that.
Yeah, so I'm so grateful that Duffy came down and spent a lot of time in Texas and North Carolina, all of these southern areas, putting on coaching clinics for the black coaches, because it was an all-black league. And so as he got to know those black coaches, they would recommend players like myself to Duffy and also Murray Warmath at the University of Minnesota. That's where Sandy and Eller,
Sure.
Carl Eller played. See, Moose played, and so that was how a lot of the Big Ten players, Big Ten conference players like myself, had a chance to come up and play in the Big Ten. And I'm so grateful, not only to my university, Michigan State, but I'm also very grateful that the Big Ten Conference really led the nation in really integrating college football. Now, we have the first, I should add that the first quarterback to play in the National Football League was Willie Thor. And he was from Michigan State in the 50s. And I guess a lot of people don't know that.
No, they don't.
Yeah, they don't know that, but Michigan State has led for many years in terms of segregation. Our President John Hanna, he was elected and appointed a first civil rights administrative commissioner under President Eisenhower. And also in terms of our housing, student housing at Michigan State, President Hanna was the one that integrated all of the student housing. You know, years ago, in terms of college students going to these universities, they were all segregated too. You couldn't live with white students. And that was another part. Now, this was in the North, see?
Right, absolutely.
In the 60s. And so a lot in regard to finding housing, you know, around the campuses of University of Minnesota, around the campuses of Michigan State University, East Lansing, Ann Arbor, all of those Big Ten schools, Columbus, Ohio State, in the 60s, when I was at school at Michigan State, the housing situation, there was a lot of discrimination. You know, black families and students, they had difficulty finding apartments that surrounded those cities, that surrounded those universities,
Mm-hmm.
and that was all in the 60s. But
No.
I think that the biggest thing that you also have to look at, we did not have cell phones and we did not have computers, and
Right.
What was happening in segregation and what we were facing, it was not as immediately known because the communications were so different. I'll give you a good example. We were national champions those 2 years, undefeated seasons, and we only played one game on national television.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, they had a rule that the Big Ten couldn't play. You couldn't play no more than one time on national television, okay? So now, as you know, Alabama, everybody follows Alabama. They're number one, right?
Right.
We only played, I guess, that Big 10 time my senior year. Oh, that was really a special. Well, as a matter of fact, we could not play that. I don't think it was played on national. It was kind of a delay type thing. So that is all a big difference in terms of how we look at things today. But I'm so grateful that I had a chance to, to attend Michigan State and to be a part of a great university. And I'm so glad that the Big Ten led the way. And really, when you think about integrating college football, I'm just so proud that I was a part of that.
Now, Maya, because it's my job, I'm going to close with a true story that's got humor in it, okay? You ready?
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in North Minneapolis, and I went to Minneapolis North High School.
Mm-hmm.
And back in that same period your father was talking about, I was walking to school one day, and we had a different relationship back then. In that neighborhood. It was a neighborhood thing. And I'm walking into school one day, and I'm 16 years old, and this young lady, she's probably 15 or 16, probably 16 years old, a young black girl, 16 years old, a young white guy, white kid, and she pulls the door open and holds the door for me. And I looked over, and I said, well, thank you very much. And she smiled and said, that's okay, Pinky. I consider myself lucky, and what you're talking about, Mr. Washington, I am grateful that I grew up that way. I am. I love that because we had a sense of humor, and we're just kind of we all lived in the same neighborhood, and we were just North Side people, and I love that. I loved my childhood for that reason.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for both. Now, when can we see Through the Banks of the Red Cedar?
Well, we're in the last 6 months of finishing.
All right.
All of the finishing will be done in Minnesota with Minnesota vendors, and we're raising money so that we can finish. The project's been supported solely by grants, my own funds, and over 200 individual donors. So we're completely independent. The Vikings aren't funding this. Michigan State isn't funding this. In order to get to the finish line, we're really relying on sort of the community of people who think this story should be told and want to help us get to the finish line.
Well, as we move closer to a release day, would you please call back again? I'd love to talk to you both about it. And the number one thing that people need to hear is gratitude. There are people that actually are grateful for their lives.
Yeah,
absolutely. That's exactly what this is about.
Do you have time for me to ask him one question?
Absolutely, Phil.
Yeah.
Hey, make sure you tell him you talk to an old dog, Philip Wise. You make sure you tell Oscar Reed that. That's my boy.
Yeah, Oscar Reed is my boy too. That's why I had to share that.
Okay, but I want to say something in just one word.
Yeah.
You came out in 1967 draft.
That's correct.
How many rounds, brother, in that draft?
How many rounds you mean?
In that particular draft.
I was in the first round.
I know, but how many rounds were there with less teams?
I don't remember that. I just know that we had 4 of our guys were picked in the first round.
I was drafted 4 years later, same number of rounds, less teams. 17 rounds.
17 rounds.
17 rounds. Okay. Yeah. Well, we didn't have this television exposure when you got drafted. See.
Right.
So when I was drafted, it was 4 of us. George Webster, Bubba was number 1. George was, and Clinton Jones was number 2.
To the Vikings.
Yeah, for the Vikings, and then of course George Webster was number 6, and I was number 8. And so I'm very proud that the 4 of us, no school has done that when you have 4.
Oh no!
In the first 8 picks, see, and the 4 of us, which I'm also very proud, we're all in the College Football Hall of Fame, and no school has 4 guys, and we all started out as freshmen together at Michigan State, and 3 of us, George, Bub and myself, we were completely from the South, see, and Clinton was from Cleveland, Ohio. So that's something that we're very proud of when we think about where he came from.
Well, thank you very much, Gene Washington, and the real talent in the family, Maya Washington.
And I agree, too.
Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.